November 21st. My name is Bill McCamley. I'm a state representative from Las Cruces, New Mexico, and here's your legislative update for the day. Earlier today, though I'm back home now, I was in Santa Fe for a meeting of our interim water committee where we had a closed-door executive session about the lawsuit that New Mexico and Texas are having regarding water rights. So Texas wants more water to come down from the Rio Grande into Texas. They're saying they're not getting enough, and we in New Mexico are saying, no, you are getting enough. And this is a big deal, right? Because if Texas gets more of that water, that would lead less water for our cities and farmers here in New Mexico and could be a real economic problem for many people living here. So I can't talk about the specifics of the lawsuit. Obviously, that's why we had a closed-door meeting. But here's what I will say. The way that we appropriate water doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. And I'll give you an example. Water that's in the river is appropriated and administered by a group called the Elephant Butte Irrigation District. And irrigation districts happen all over the state and all over the western United States. But water in the ground, which is water that is in these aquifers, which are these underground pockets of water, is administered by the state engineer. Here's the problem. Water doesn't appear magically below the surface. You know, it comes down the river and seeps down into the ground. And so that same drop of water that was appropriated by one agency on the top, so let's say a farmer irrigates their crops and some of that water goes in the plant, more of it goes down into the ground. That same drop of water is then administered by one group here and another group here. And, finding ways of getting those two groups to work together and figure out ways of using that same amount of water together is kind of a challenge because historically there's been a lot of conflict between those agencies. We also talked about efforts at the city level to be more efficient in water use, and we had representatives from Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Rio Rancho, and Las Cruces come down to Santa Fe and talk about some of their efforts. And they've actually done a really good job. And so, for instance, in Albuquerque, they use less water now than they did in 1980, even though they have, I think it's something like double the population. And so when you look at the things that the cities have done well, what have they done well? They've done a lot of education to people saying, hey, don't water during the day in the middle of July because most of that water is just going to evaporate up and not go into your lawn. If you want to zero-scape your lawn and make it more of a desert environment, because most of the water residentially that is used for irrigation. They've done things like voucher programs. So if you change your toilet, for instance, to a low-flow toilet, other cities have given you $50, $100 vouchers, something like that, to be able to get that water use low. And that's been really, really good. And we also talked about some different pieces of proposed legislation that deal with water and agriculture. So legalizing hemp was one of them, talking about watershed restoration and specific things that we can do and specific monies we can appropriate at the legislature to do that were important, and a few other things. This is a big deal for us. We live in a desert, and if we don't use our water as efficiently as we can, well, that's bad news for a lot of different reasons. The second thing I want to talk about today is a meeting I had yesterday, which is with the Democratic caucus. So generally what happens in legislatures is the two parties, they will meet together and determine who their leadership is. So they determine their leader, their whip, and their caucus chair. Since the Democrats are now in control of the House, we also picked a nominee for Speaker of the House. And if all of us vote for them, or for that person, which generally happens, that person becomes Speaker of the House, which is probably the second most individual powerful person in New Mexico. So we picked Brian Egoff, a Democrat from Santa Fe, to be our nominee for Speaker. But here's where it gets interesting. We picked three women, all women of color from very different places in New Mexico, to be our majority leader, our majority whip, and our majority caucus leader. And I think that's really cool. I saw in the news today that a group of neo-Nazis were in D.C. either yesterday or today making Sig Heil signs to, the current administration and some of the policies they want to see enacted. And as a white guy, that is as far from American values as I think we should be. I like being inclusive. I like the fact that we can choose people not based on the color of their skin or what kind of genitalia they have, but whether or not they can do the job. And I think it sends a really strong message that we in New Mexico, we believe that diversity is good, and we want to embrace people from all different backgrounds and walks of life, and that increases our value as a community and doesn't decrease it. So anyways, that's your update for the day. As always, if you have questions, comments, or concerns on these or any of the issues, I would love to hear from you. Thanks, and hope everyone's doing well. Bye.